Tonight, Donald Trump and Russia, his business conflicts, infrastructure, even the message of inclusion the cast of Hamilton tried to teach him. Is the Donald doing enough to ease worries over the administration he is setting up? We will talk to two sitting Democratic lawmakers, Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy and New York's Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney. Plus, the Syrian city of Aleppo now, in the words of the UN, a meltdown of humanity. Mass executions, including civilian women and children, as rebels move out and the Russian-backed Syrian army moves in. And the Obama administration does not mince words in their condemnation. So the question is, what can and should the U.S. do? And later, gun laws in the era of Donald Trump. His election bolstering the vision of pro-gun groups, including those who want to bring guns into football stadiums. Just imagine drunken brawls like this one now with guys carrying. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I am Richard French, and thank you for joining us this Tuesday night. We begin on the Trump watch. That as the president-elect postpones the announcement that he had promised on how he will handle his business conflicts of interest. Supposedly we were going to get it Thursday. Now we'll have to wait a month. We got also two more names for the Trump cabinet. One, a multimillionaire CEO with no government or official diplomatic experience. The other, a former governor who will likely head the federal department whose name he couldn't remember when he said he wanted to shut it down. Rex Tillerson doesn't have government or military experience, but President-elect Donald Trump says his pick for Secretary of State is, quote, one of the truly great business leaders of the world.
We just couldn't be more grateful that someone of Rex Tillerson's proven leadership and accomplishments has been willing to step forward to serve our nation as our next Secretary of State.
Tillerson has spent his entire career at oil giant ExxonMobil. He's been the company's CEO since 2006. And now, under a microscope, Tillerson's deep ties with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
I've known him since 1999, and I have a very close relationship with him.
Three Republican senators, Marco Rubio, Lindsey Graham, and John McCain, publicly expressing concerns about potential conflicts of interest.
It could be that Democrats join with Republicans in a narrowly divided Senate to defeat that nomination.
And to lead the Department of Energy, Trump is expected to pick a former rival, former Texas Governor Rick Perry. A bit of irony here. If confirmed, Perry would lead the federal department that he once said he wanted to eliminate during his own presidential run.
Third agency of government, yeah. I would do away with the education, commerce, and let's see, I can't. The third one I can't, sorry. Oops.
Trump's also taking heat for postponing a Thursday press conference where he was expected to lay out how he'll separate himself from his businesses once he's sworn in. So how about this for a distraction? This morning at Trump Tower, a quick photo op with Kanye West.
He's a good man.
Can't make it up. We will have analysis on all of these developments and more related to Trump later on. We'll be speaking with New York Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney. But first, when it comes to Russia, hacking, Tillerson, guns, and more, we turn to Connecticut Democratic Senator Chris Murphy. Let's start that we're about to inaugurate a president whose election, according to the CIA, was aided by the Russian intelligence operation. What is more shocking to you, that or the fact that the president-elect dismisses it entirely and has surrounded himself by folks who question not only the findings but also the integrity of the CIA?
Well, I don't think it's that surprising sitting here today to find out that the Russians were attempting to influence this election in favor of Donald Trump. I mean, during the campaign, it was pretty clear that they were leaking information about Hillary Clinton and making up stories about her in order to get him elected. Of course, in the middle of the campaign, Donald Trump on international TV asked the Russians to continue to try to interfere in these elections. So I don't think that that's surprising. And to the extent that, Donald Trump is, breaking with the CIA and suggesting that, their work isn't credible, That's certainly very damaging to U.S. national security, but it's, again, not terribly surprising. I think that, Donald Trump has shown a disdain so far for experts. He's not receiving briefings about national security that presidents normally do on a daily basis. It portends some really rough times ahead if the President of the United States isn't going to be talking to the CIA, isn't going to be getting daily briefings. It's a little hard to figure out how he's going to keep this country safe.
Obviously, we now know his pick for Secretary of State. What concerns do you have about Tillerson? And we've heard already 3 Republicans go on record that they have concerns. And Senator McDonald also said, regarding, at least per the investigation, he pledges to have a thorough one. Your concerns, but also your Republican colleagues, about where the president and his relationship with Russia, and more specifically Tillerson, are.
Well, if you had any doubt about whether or not Donald Trump's strategy was going to be to cozy up to Vladimir Putin, it was answered today. He nominated Rex Tillerson for Secretary of State, one of Putin's closest allies. There's really no reason to pick Rex Tillerson, someone who has no government experience, someone who has no diplomatic experience, other than the fact that he's a close friend to Vladimir Putin. So it appears that Donald Trump's entire international strategy is built around building a closer relationship with Vladimir Putin. And that's a disaster for the United States. It's a disaster for Europe. It's a disaster for climate change. And I'm going to be opposing Tillerson's nomination. He's just the wrong person for the job. And I think there'll be Republicans who will join me in opposing his nomination.
You mentioned, Senator, that it shouldn't shock anybody that Donald Trump obviously has not just cozied up to Putin, but even asked Putin to continue hacking, if you will, the Russian interests back in July. To that point, reportedly, President Obama had a decision to make in October as to whether or not that he would go more public with this and question the hacking on the part of the Russians, but he wanted bipartisan support that apparently wasn't there. In retrospect, should the president have been more vocal than he was before the election in November?
Well, I have yet to see the CIA report, so I think it's difficult to know what the president was looking at, and many of us have asked for the CIA to declassify this report so that we can take a look at it ourselves. Clearly, if the administration did have definitive information that the Russians were trying to weigh in on Trump's behalf, and there was a way to do that without divulging the methods that we learned it, probably would have been relevant information. But it's hard for me to say that based upon nothing in front of me. I just have the reports about what the CIA's conclusions are.
Fair enough. We know from some of the picks to populate the cabinet that they clearly don't believe in some of the very jobs, if confirmed, that they would run. You've got, as head of the EPA, a person who's on record as being a skeptic of climate change. You have, in addition, the person who would be the Labor Secretary. He doesn't believe there should be a minimum wage increase. Education Secretary has done everything in her career to defund public education. Rick Perry, if he gets confirmed, and he was able to remember a few years back here, the Energy Department, he said that would have been one of the agencies he defunded, and now he'd be put in charge to run it. Tell the people at home why they ought to be concerned that the people who run these committees want to, in effect, get rid of them.
Well, listen, these are really important agencies. You can talk down government all you want, but the Department of Energy actually isn't in the business of taking oil out of the ground. The Department of Energy is in charge of nuclear security. The reason that you are protected at work from dangerous toxins in manufacturing plants or from overtime abuse by your employer is because of the Department of Labor. So, what's dangerous is that Trump is putting people into some of these agencies that want to dismantle those protections. I mean, the new Secretary of Labor, 50% of his restaurants, this is the guy who ran Carl's Jr., 50% of his restaurants were cited for violations of labor laws. And so a guy who has been a well-known labor law scofflaw is now going to be in charge of the agency that oversees restaurants, that oversees places of business. So that's really disturbing. But then it's also disturbing that none of these nominees really have ever had any experience running bureaucracies or often in the areas that they're going to oversee. So all of these folks have, are coming from outside of government. It's fine to have a few of those, but the idea that all of these agencies are going to be staffed with people who have never ever spent any time working in these issue areas, I think that should worry us as well.
Final question, Senator. You've worked very hard, as well as members of the Connecticut delegation, in the aftermath of Sandy Hook as it relates to gun safety. We'll have the anniversary coming up, unfortunately, very shortly. You've already heard the president-elect talk about expanding gun rights, and more specifically, let's say somebody in Arizona where they can have open carry, that same person, if they got their license there, should be able to walk down Main Street in Hartford with the same rights he enjoyed from the state where he was licensed. What's your reaction, and what do you think the chances this could get through in the current makeup of Washington?
Well, I think this is going to be a big fight, and there's just no way in Connecticut that we can accept somebody coming up from Florida or Texas with a permit to conceal a dangerous weapon and be able to bring it into a supermarket or into a school. There is something still called states' rights, and Republicans seem to believe in states' rights a lot, except when it comes to gun laws. So I think this is going to be a big fight. The reality is that people don't support these kind of things. The silver lining of the 2016 election was that there were a lot of people who came out and voted for stronger gun protections. Referendums passed in Nevada, in California, and Washington. So the people are on our side here. But yeah, there's a big fight coming because Donald Trump and the NRA are tied together, and they're going to expect something from him in the next session.
Interesting time. Senator Murphy, I appreciate it for you. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks a lot.
And speaking of gun policies under Trump, we're going to have more on that, including a Trump-backed proposal that could shred gun laws in our region. Again, that's coming up later in the hour. But up next, we will focus on Syria, specifically the city of Aleppo, in a scene the UN now describes as a meltdown of humanity. Civilians, women and children being slaughtered indiscriminately. That as the rebels move out and the Russian-backed Syrian army moves in. We'll have more on that after this.